Okay, and this is Beatriz Valls Rodriguez, and she is a native of Spain, Madrid-born artist, educator, and social science researcher with a strong passion for creativity and meaningful human connection. Her practice weaves together the visual arts, sociology, and education to create spaces that invite reflection, spark dialogue, and nurture a sense of belonging. Bea currently teaches visual art at both Glendale Community College and the Waverly School. As an artist, Bea places value on reflecting on one's positionality and perspective, and I heard her say this weekend when we met that it is the making that changes you. And we have Alex Mendez here in the house from Chicago. He's been teaching art for over 25 years in both Chicago and New Mexico. His teaching experience spans elementary, middle, and high school. And his curriculum consistently focuses on contemporary art and artists and emphasizes non-white artists with a variety of backgrounds and experiences. His drive is to have students have voice and choice, and he strives to push those students to identify what matters most to them. So, artist educators, let's open up the conversation. And whoever would like to start, what is culturally relevant pedagogy in your lens?
I'll start. so, um, so to me, culturally responsive teaching in arts education, it means that students feel seen, they feel valued, they're also connected to their community. And I'm bringing in like my public art background and then just making that connection. So it's not just what happens in the classroom, it's about like helping students see themselves reflected not only in their schools, their classrooms, but outside in their neighborhoods, and then just the general public spaces around them. And also because, like I said, because of my role, I'm seeing this more differently since I'm looking at like the 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 schools like holistically, like the different needs of each school. But I understand, and also my role in public art, I understand how powerful it is when art represents and uplifts the voices and the stories of the communities, and especially where they live. Where they live, they see themselves out there where they live. So culturally responsive teaching isn't just about like just general teaching art, but also just helping students build their identity, their agency, and like just a regular like this general sense of like belonging. So
Hi. Yes, I'll echo basically what Kat said. There's a lot of very similarities in terms of my approach. One of the things that I really strive to do with students is to try to get their voice to come out and try to find ways to get them to feel comfortable enough that they are able to talk about things that either relate to them or are from their communities or things that they have like experience with. It's also about making sure that they're doing things that are relevant to them, not just making arbitrary things, but that the things that they're doing have some kind of a connection to either who they are or who they want to be, and like the different communities that they come from. So it's kind of trying to give a voice to them or helping them find ways that they can share their voice with other people, and then usually doing it through different kind of art media technique process and things like that. It's not always the easiest thing with students. I teach middle school students, but also elementary, but mainly with middle school it can be kind of a challenging thing at times, but it's very rewarding.
Hi, everybody. I think one of the ways to answer this question for me is also what is culture? What is a responsible way to address your culture? And by that, I mean also the language you speak at home. What do you eat? How is your neighborhood? If you have siblings, if you have a disability, there are many ways to approach it. But I also find important that it's not only about you. It's the reflection about you, it's the dialogue about you that emerges that relationship with the site or with the environment that you are surrounded by in terms of human environment or social environment or environmental environment. So it's also the path of questioning where and who are you in that moment in time, processing that, asking you that, researching that, and making decisions on how to represent that, because in our world is visual, and that is a whole other digestion of choices and sacrifices that you have to take away to choose that. Yeah.
Well said. So each of you brought up this idea of exploring who you are as an artist and who your students are. So what are some ways that each of you bring up choice and voice to get to know your students and their diverse backgrounds? What are some ways you make those connections, especially when there's a background maybe you're not familiar with or don't identify yourself with?
May I? That, to me, that's an ideal scenario, actually, because you're really talking about prejudice, you're talking about bias, right? When it comes to what you expect as an answer, is really, you should not be listening to yourself, right? So to me, the way I tend to do it is in a constructivist way, is really more about asking, well, first of all, you observe the room, no? You observe, you feel the room. It's not just visual representation, but, you know, behavior, who is connected with who. I mean, you are really kind of like checking in to see what kind of music you're playing as the DJ, you know? Without your curriculum, I would say. And then I would say that the first thing I play with is depends on the grade, obviously, but is a big word or a small word. For example, love, or for example, Valentine, or for example, friendship, or for example, environment, or for example, tree, like from big to small, or to small to big. So you know, you don't have somebody overwhelmed, or you can help those needs in people that may need more structure, scaffolding, right? And I also play with art history, but I definitely use that constructivist way, in the way of asking them what is that they want. And sometimes it's an open question, or sometimes it's a very specific, so I can bring them with me to that journey. And then the specificity of the artwork or the requirements, but there's always some space for breaking the rules in my process as well. There are requirements, but there's also space to push that. I don't know if I answered the question. I forgot it, actually.
Yeah, it's about the idea of voice and choice with your students. And I think you talked around it with accessing language, of the idea of a big concept, little concept, with words, correct?
Yeah, I think is that game of like that conversation in which it's not about me, it's about what do I perceive that they are interested in, and then we get in. So sometimes I even not have a pre-design lesson. I mean, I have a design lesson, but I don't have a specific theme. So I structure it in a way, maybe the first day that we are making agreements. Like, I play a lot with social emotional, but also constructivist, in the way to bring them that participation of engagement.
I will piggyback on that, and the idea of like voice and choice, and really, and what you said about like what connects everyone together. So what is like the that's really where I usually, when lesson planning, now I'm going to take this, and because, you know, I have a different position now, since my position is unique in terms of like now I support all the art and media teachers district-wide, I incorporated like in these district-wide art projects. So I lead these like public art initiatives within the whole school district. So, and I'm going to refer to like the in the intro page, there was an image there that's like it was a bunch of like bus shelters. So for that project, in terms of like student voice and choice, and like how do you bring everyone together with all these different schools and like all, you know, all these schools in San Diego. The I Am San Diego project, basically the students use media art tools to doodle on how they connect with their city. So that was like to me, it's like, what is the connecting? What, you know, how do we all connect with each other? How do we all relate to each other? And for me also for that specific project, it was not only geographically, we were all different, but also it was different grade levels. It was just like I was approaching this like from like TK to like 12th grade. So but basically like I wanted the prompt to be very simple, like your guiding question is going to be very simple, like what makes San Diego your home, and how do you connect with San Diego? And basically the students they responded by sketching on the idea of like their identity within the city, their culture, the community, through the digital works. And then basically what we did was we compiled it, and then I worked with MTS and also the Clear Channel Outdoor to create like these posters for the bus shelters. There's 30 bus shelters all over San Diego with student artwork. And like I said, for me, it's always been like, how can we all, what is like the general connector for all of us? Like, what can everyone relate to? And even though, like I said, it was just like doodles, right? It was like, oh, like everybody was just like, oh, we just made these sketches. Now all of a sudden they're like in these bus shelters all over the city. But it was, to me, it was like also stress free. Like, oh, we're just making doodles. Like, how do you connect with San Diego? And it gave them like ownership, and then saw like these possibilities of like this small digital doodle being out there in the community space, and the public realm, and enabling them to become more engaged and confident, and then, you know, also learning at the same time. So that's how I always kind of like in general, how I lesson plan, like how do we connect? What can kids, you know, how do you keep them engaged, right? Because they're not going to speak up if they're not going to be willing to share. So, right. So in terms of like voice and choice.
So the approach is usually I try talking to my students. Like I try to get to know them. I try to have conversations with them. You know, like when they're working on projects, when they're doing things, like noticing what they're making or what other ideas, and try to have like, you know, holistic conversations about like where they came from, what that idea is about, or, you know, the influence and those kinds of things, which lead to other conversations about like, you know, what they're doing with their families, where they're going on vacation, what experiences they've had. But, you know, and that does help because it creates an environment where they feel a lot more comfortable. They're able to like talk about their ideas freely, not just with me, but with their peers. But one of the things that I really like doing is, so in the beginning of the year, with middle school students, I like to get them into doing some kind of a project that's specifically related to, maybe could be something that either I'm interested in or some general theme or idea. It's usually connected to some kind of contemporary artist. And I try to show artists that are like have that the students might have some connection to, like they're non-white or they're, you know, LGBTQI family, you know, or just a variety of different perspectives, but those artists are also still alive. And so then that way it creates this sort of sense of like, here's these people who are actually making art, who are existing, doing things, and this is what they're using, and this is what it looks like. And then having students like, okay, let's work within these sort of confines with these specific materials to create work, which then leads us to have more conversations because we're talking about those artists, we're talking about that artwork. And then once they're making the work or finished, then they're talking about their artwork and why they made it and those things. And then from that project, I like to transition into an independent project where I'm saying, okay, we've done this thing together. We've looked at these artists, we've looked at these ideas. Now I'm opening this up for you to be flexible and think about what media you would like to work with, what ideas you want to explore. I do give them like a list of things that they should kind of approach, but you know, it still tries to be like, okay, so like you've had some experience making and thinking about art and talking about art. Now, can you do it that's something connected to you or related to you in whatever, you know, way?
Well, thanks, y'all. I think it's funny that we have these fancy terms like culturally relevant or responsive pedagogy, but it's really just like talking to the kids. You guys also like just let's conversate, you know, in a way that makes people feel like they want to share openly, and then you build upon it, as you said, constructivist or involving family and community. And speaking about that family and community, Kat, you spoke to it about the visual representation with the bus stop, and you're welcome obviously to speak more, but do you guys do anything directly in relationship with their family members or directly with the community as Kat expressed? Bea, I saw you nodding. You want to go for it?
Yeah, I mean, I also come from public space, or you know, the public realm, and I do play with that a lot, outside of the classroom, outside of the museum, outside of the white walls, you name it, right? And the last one I've done regarding that, it was called the fridge. The fridge. How does your fridge look like? So I was bringing really the domestic into the class and into the big room, like we call it. On top of that, I have to say that I'm very lucky in the workplace that I am, and in both places, and I have this freedom or this trust, right? So I don't risk a lot because I have an audience that they play with me basically. So you know, these students, I separated the work in 5 steps, I believe, if I'm not wrong. I always tend to use recycled materials as well. It's really important. And this was called the fridge. So as you can imagine, the fridge is normally in the kitchen. So the kitchen is one of the most important places in a family, right? And the behaviors and the choices and how do you consume and what do you consume and what are your habits and what is your traditions and blah, blah, blah. So they had to take, you know, 1 point perspective, this kind of, again, like you were joking with the terms, well, you know, make some sketches, right? And from there, they had to do a watercolor drawing from what they were looking at, the door closed or the door open of the fridge. So 2 watercolors. Then they had to do another step of making it 3D with cardboard. And then you open a whole other world for them, because some of them may love it and some of them may have loved more 2D. And it's fabulous how they interpret like an apple that is eaten or something like that, instead of an apple that, you know, is about to be eaten and things like that. So there is always that component of bringing the family, bringing that conversation in the family at home, things that matter, basically. What do you eat? I mean, it's important, right? And maybe go to the supermarket together and maybe think further on. And then they had to do a 3. Sorry, I said with cardboard. One group made it one fridge, one big fridge. I'm not joking. If it was a real scale fridge, and they among themselves, they self-organized, because I also play a lot that leadership, you know, all that community organizational skills. So this team or this group of, this is in middle school as well, I have to say, they all participated in what to put inside of the fridge. 1 person or 2 people were making the actual fridge with cardboard, and then they all placed tomatoes and strawberry and da 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 da. Of course, I participated as well, bringing the leftovers of a salad, you know, like not the actual salad, but the packaging, right? And things like that. And then lastly, some multimedia. So to me, it's also important not to be comfortable. It may not sound very nice, but to think about eating differently. So for example, how do you eat the apple? Or how do you cut the apple? Or how do you cut an onion or something that is normally for the functional purpose that we all know. And so there was a performance, and there were photography and video in which every student had to bring a fruit or a vegetable. It didn't have to be eaten. But the point was to think about, how am I going to cut this differently? So that experience, and then we placed it all together. And then the parents came and had conversation about that. So that is one last one that I've done in terms of domestic, family, familiar, sorry, not family only.
Alex, do you have a specific example that maybe you can think of connecting with families? Or in any
Nothing
capacity?
very specific. We have, our families are really supportive, or at least they're supportive of the arts in our school, and they do kind of like they really encourage their kids to do things. So one of the things that's kind of a interesting thing for the not middle school students in my school, so kinder through fourth grade, I do the TAB method, teaching for artistic behavior. So it's a lot of choice and center based. And so a lot of times students are making things that are, you know, like a lot of cardboard, a lot of recycled materials that they're either bringing from home, or their families are donating, or other people are just, you know, bringing. So there's all these different materials. And, you know, some of the stuff, because it's kid inspired and kid made, it looks kind of like just different. And so when they bring it home, you know, the parents are usually like, I have conversations with them and they're like, oh, my kid loves the class. They love, you know, making and creating and doing these things. And they're like, and we have so many of these things. And I just tell the parents, I say, you know, that's great. I was like, you know, what you should do is go from the oldest piece and just start getting rid of it. And then they'll never know, because then they'll just keep adding to that. And then it just creates a really good flow of like, they're still creating, they're still making. And so I think families generally have a sense of like, you know, they know what their kids are doing. They know that their kids feel comfortable, and that they're creating, and they're just approaching things differently. Like, right, what Beatriz said, that they're doing, you know, just exploring things, challenging themselves. And I feel like that the parents have that support of their kids, like they encourage them and they really push them to do that. And that's something that I really enjoy having conversations with them about.
One of our high school art teachers, shout out to Lincoln High School if she's here. I don't know if she's in here, but she actually, it just reminded me of when you guys were talking. She, what's awesome about my position is that I get to see what everyone else is, even though I've been in the classroom, I was in the classroom for 24 years, is that in my position, I get to see what everyone else does, and just like really, just like like glorify and like just like, I don't know, applaud. So anyway, one of our teachers at Lincoln High School, she does recipes, and I thought that just like the students share family recipes, and they create like these posters, and and just very like graphic. And so anyway, when you said like the fridge, I was like, oh, that's very kind of like, it's very similar. But yeah, and I love looking at them and seeing just the different, like I said, like different recipes. But in terms of like, if I'm looking at this once again, like district wide, and I have to say that like over the weekend we had a meeting, and then you guys, you saw me at the art walk in Little Italy, and the school district, we had a couple of booths there at art walk. I feel that like in terms of like bringing families together and meeting families, it's just like, if you have like these events, like these well-known events within your community, you want to be present, right? And you want to bring in these families also to be present and to, you know, to be open and welcome that you're part of this, right? So Art Walk in Little Italy here in San Diego, it's a pretty big event. So, and I just want to make sure that they can see themselves in like these, you know, that these events that they might not think that they, you know, that they fit in. They're like, oh, that's just like, I don't know, pastoral. I'm just kidding. But you know, but like I said, it's just I want to make sure that our families are like in these like events that they may not see themselves, and like it's they have their presence and students are present in these opportunities. So no insult to pastoral. Just like,
I think we get you. We got you on that one. I saw everyone's like, yeah, yeah. Thank you all for sharing. I'm going to pivot a little bit because the audience received some resources that you shared with us that were then passed along to them. And I was wondering if you guys could each speak briefly about the resources that you shared. You each had shared like a lesson plan or a level of curriculum that you had used in your classroom. You spoke about it now, but you shared some hard copies. And if you want to point out a few things within those resources that you saw directly impact the kids, that, you know, looking back, you're like, okay, these things that I did, wow, that had a lasting effect. Want me to just call on somebody?
We are in class.
Right?
I feel I don't want to be the first one again.
Right.
I want to get in after somebody, but I'm happy whatever either way. I'm ready.
Okay, go.
I brought some samples. So the question is bringing what was this project about, right? Valentine, right? So I don't know if you know this story. Valentine. Well, of course, in Spain or Italy or etc., we don't call it Valentine. It's a saint for us, okay? It's Saint Valentine's. Like Patrick's is Saint Patrick's. So long story short, I don't know if anybody knows the story of Valentine. Does anybody know who is this person? Because this person really existed, regardless of all the chocolate that we can eat and the hearts and so on, right? So, you know, a little bit of cheesy, but I find it funny, but also meaningful, which is the whole point of this conversation, I find. Valentine was a man that I don't remember exactly the century, but a few centuries ago, he was marrying people that were not allowed to get married. So basically, as you can imagine, same gender or different race or different ethnicity or whatever it was that was not okay in that moment in time. And I thought, well, that's a great concept, right? That it's important to refresh because I don't know what do you do normally in Valentine's? You can celebrate or you don't, whatever it is. But in any way, we're surrounded by red and pink and chocolates and hearts and basically bringing money, right? So I thought of this is for middle schoolers as well. I think it's relevant to stage the grade because the audience is so different. So this for middle schoolers, I decided to put together the concept of love because what if you don't have somebody that loves you in a romantic way, right? We're talking about school age and we all want to be inclusive and loved. So that sense of love, I transformed it into somebody special and a friend. Or if you see somebody that don't have something that has been given, you're actually going to give it. You're going to make something that you're going to keep and you're going to give the same thing to that other person. And I don't want to jump this step, but it's kind of like that. So then I went again into art history or contemporary art, but in this case, it was art history. And we all know Henri Matisse, modernist, French, blah, 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 and Pablo Picasso, Spanish, and contemporaneous. And we all know that they had a relationship, sometimes very good, sometimes not very good, but they ended up very good friends. And that is also very natural in every human relationship, which I find also healthy or not, but it is real, right? So I brought up with that an excuse about their love of animals, because again, I want to bring it outside of you as well as, do you have a loved one, or does somebody loves you? I don't want to put that, because it's too uncomfortable. Middle schoolers don't like to talk about themselves in that way publicly. So I decided to think like that in terms of their love of dogs. So paper cuts were very common for Pablo Picasso and Henri Matisse, and they loved this bird that is a dove. That is also a symbol of peace. And if you don't have peace, you don't have love. And if you don't have love, you don't have peace, right? So with all this charge, right, this meaning, charging this project, we worked with the silhouette of dove, and some people made with recycled Trader Joe's bags or something similar, or sculpture with cardboard or ceramic. They had to do two kind of doves or something that looked like it. And I said two because I wanted some humor in this. And that's when Home Alone comes into the game. Home Alone, which is a fun movie, right? There is a very important part where this kid goes to the toy store, to toy shop, and he also is alone in the park, and he meets this woman that, as far as I know, doesn't have a home and is old and is cold in New York in Christmas and loves doves and takes care of doves, and the doves take care of her. So the whole concept is this. And the point is that they had to do two. So this was like a bracelet as well, you know, I mean, I'm being a little bit adult now, but as you can imagine, they just shared it, and I don't know where they went. So the whole concept was about making something for yourself, but you're bringing it to somebody else, and so you have something object. So that was my project.
Kat or Alex? And just a heads up, y'all, we do have one more question after this, and then we'll do the Q&A, but just looking at our clock. But if you want to reflect on the resources you shared.
Just really quickly, the resource I shared is actually a work in progress. So it's a community resource database that I created for our teachers, so for our visual and media arts teachers. But anyway, actually, you know, but basically the way the district is organized is through clusters, meaning that the schools are geographically grouped by the high school in which the students will likely attend. So if you look at the resource, it's a map with like by cluster, and basically I created the database because it helps teachers connect with local cultural institutions, maybe public spaces that's around the district and also near like their neighborhood. So if you click on each of the cluster, if you get a chance, the teachers can find locations within the community that may be possible for, maybe like if they want to connect to the public libraries that's close to them, the community centers, or like county parks or city parks. So it's just giving them like an idea on like how else can you go beyond like I said, just like your school site. So, and even if you click on the VAPA offerings, so within the cluster, it'll say like VAPA offerings, VAPA visual arts and performing arts. It'll also show you all the courses that's within that cluster that has the teachers, and also includes the CTE pathway. So that like a lot of times, and you know what I realized when I started this position is that people don't know each other, even though like, you know, the elementary school and the middle school are like right, you know, like within your neighborhood. So like even just connecting them within like the teachers within their neighborhood. So I just hope to provide transparency in terms of like just information And like I said, it's just it's a work in progress. I'm like slowly, a lot of teachers, they look at it, they're like a little overwhelmed, but what they really found helpful is just like realizing who's in their cluster so that they can reach out to like the elementary school, the high school teachers can reach out, to the elementary school, middle school, and, and so forth. So, but basically the goal was to make all the information central, also for community engagement, to be more like accessible and also, and intentional, right?
So that resource that I shared is pretty old. And so I'm trying to like really think through the results of it. I think what I was trying to really go for with students is because our school, so our school is a dual language, bilingual, bicultural school. So all the students that come to our school learn Spanish and English. The percentages of Spanish that they are learning is higher as they are in the younger grades. And then it's like 80, it used to be 90-10 and then 80-20 and so on and so forth. And then I think by like sixth grade, it was like sixth or seventh grade, it just completely flipped. So it was like, or maybe it ended at 50-50. So like some subjects are always taught in one language, other subjects are always taught in the other language. But part of that is that we had this thing called Curriculum of the Americas. And the Curriculum of the Americas means that in second grade, students study the Taínos. So they learn the history, they learn the culture, they learn the background. They do a play, they use kind of, I don't know the literature that they use, but they use a play, then they perform kind of like this story of these either myths or not myths, these stories of the Taínos. And then same thing kind of happens in third grade with the Inca, fourth grade, the Maya, fifth grade, the Aztecs. And in the third grade and fourth and fifth, they have a market. And so they make things and then they kind of sell them to sort of try to do some of the similar things of like the things that people would be making, that they would learn about like different materials, different process of, what those cultures made, what they used, what they did, what they were for. And so then it's a very kind of like an immersive experience. And one of the things that I was always interested in is like they do these things, but how I was always, and this is a really difficult question, but I was always interested in kind of getting, how do I get students to like critique their learning? How do you get them to reflect on what is it that they're learning? They're learning about these cultures that, if you look at it in a way, yes, they were conquered and they were colonized, but those empires or those bigger, people, maybe not so much the Taínos, but like the Inca, Maya, and Aztecs, they also then conquered like the local people around them. And so then it was to try to get students to kind of think about research as art and research as a process. So like making their research is the process, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that art has to have a final product, but them doing the work towards that is interesting because they can then find things or discover stuff or have conversations and present. So it was kind of like a challenge. I don't really remember like any specific things of what happened, but it was like an interesting thing to get kids to have these conversations and try to like do some research of like, what are you finding? Like, let's look for Aztec images. Let's see what we notice from these images. What are we paying attention to? What's standing out, and leading to other questions and other conversations.
Thanks, y'all. One last thing before we get to specific questions is you are all clearly veterans with this work. So imagine you're just starting out. What would you tell somebody, first few steps on how can I engage more deeply with culturally responsive pedagogy? How can I incorporate this in my classroom? I'm just beginning. Maybe one or two tips.
I can go. So I would say one of the things is to kind of like dig deep into who you are. And I think understanding you and what your interests are, but also like where you come from and, potentially your biases and your other issues, and being able to talk about those, because if you're ultimately talking with your students or you're ultimately sharing your knowledge with other people, you should be open and understanding of like, you know, yes, maybe you don't agree with certain things, or you have issues, or you know, those kinds of things. I think that helps you to be a little bit more resilient. Like you can say, well, I've had these experiences. These are the things that I understand, but I'm also willing to, like, you know, discover and explore. And I also think that talking with your students is a really big thing, right? Getting to know them and figuring out what their interests are, who they are. That helps you kind of like together, you know, create a community and create a sense of belonging that, you know, is important, because that you can approach you can approach it that way with anywhere you go, because it's not always the same. It's going to be different.
Piggyback again with Alex. I feel like I'm in public service, right? This is a public service position, and my duty is to listen. So I feel like that I'm a humble, active listener who just wants to connect all the dots with students' funds of knowledge, and you know, and like understanding that, and like that's how you keep them, like how we engage folks. And I have to say this because the way I connect with my teen, she might be listening, but so the way I connect with my teen is like she likes to like show me reels, right? Like she'll like share reels with me, and I'm like, you know, it's the same when I taught middle school. It's the same thing that they want to share with you, and they want you to, you know, to hear them. So that's just how I feel. Like I am just a humble, active listener, and that I'm taking that all in, and you know, just want to be there, right? So basically.
I find that having fun is crucial. I think that if you don't have fun, everybody feels that. And if you are, you know, the very first step, if you want to take some time and only do what you know what to do, or you're feeling comfortable, like if you're painting with acrylic all your life and you do geometric or, you know, abstract or whatever you do, navigate that beforehand while you are listening and being open, you know, to anime or whatever is that they like, right? But in the beginning, I find that maybe being in the comfort zone while you're learning, while you are always having fun, is fundamental.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think now is the time where we are going to open it up to the audience for any specific questions any of y'all might have. You can put them in the chat, or if you want to take over the mic and ask our panel. Oh, it looks we have one right away. I'm just going to interrupt anybody who was getting on there. So So Alicia, shout out to Alicia. She's asking, can you each speak a little bit more explicitly about why is this so important? You know, this whole topic, I kind of took it for granted that we're here because we know it's significant, but why is this? Why is this work so necessary? And how does this approach respond to the very real cultural erasure and deficit lens our kids traditionally encounter in the schools? And I can repeat that. Why is it so important? And how does this approach to teaching respond to the very real cultural erasure and deficit lens our kids traditionally encounter in schools?
If I may, I think that's also why I connected to, you know, I don't know exactly what is in the mind of Alicia, but I find that having fun and doing geometric shapes, for example, is also culturally responsive teaching in the arts. By this I mean, again, if I could ask Alicia to, you know, what does it mean for her culturally responsive? Is it like addressing, you know, I don't know, Mexican Diego Rivera or Frida Kahlo, like bringing that diversity or culturally representational in the class? I don't know exactly what does that mean, but if, you know, simplicity or abstract shapes is not culturally responsive, it could be not, right? Because along the history of painters is common also to have this kind of abstract or geometric shapes. Why is it important? I think there are many ways to bring it through not representational as well. I think that's my answer.
I think voice and stories are so important right now, and especially if we are being attacked, like in our cultural institutions. And I feel that our individual voices are needed at this moment, right? It's super significant in terms of like the classroom. And like I said, that's why I always push it for like public art, because if in the institutional level, if our voices are being like censored, that means that we have to do our due diligence in our own classrooms to make sure that our students are actually being heard. So, and this is through stories. This is through, like I said, just like presence, right? Just like presence out in the community. So I think that's definitely needed at this moment, especially, in time when we are being censored, right? In a mass level.
Yeah, I think as art educators, I think we have a responsibility to to make sure that that erasure is not happening. That we're making space for students to, talk about their voice, share their voice, talk about their culture, or even kind of try to make sense of like what is happening around them, what is going on. And that can look like in a lot of different ways. And, in terms of saying, what should the artwork look like, I like to approach it as like, if it's a student and they're sharing their voice and they are informed, they have experience, they've, are familiar with other things that they probably wouldn't have had because either I didn't teach them or they haven't had that experience, then I feel like they have a better sense of like, what is going on around them, what is their power in making art, but also what is their purpose in making art, right? And so like, is it about just making something look pretty, living off of it, or is it to make a statement, to bring about some kind of change, or do something with that? And I think that those are really important things, and at least that's kind of how I approach this topic. But also, having students make art, not just for like to make it look really great, but what is the meaning behind it, what are they trying to say, and what is it for, right? So that other people can kind of maybe start thinking through a lot of different things.
To know your power. That's beautifully said. I know we're right near the edge, but we got a good question from Anna that I think could maybe like kind of pull things together. So, especially as Kat and Alex spoke to Alicia's question regarding erasure and how to push back against that erasure as things are rapidly being censored. Anna's asking, in today's political climate where culturally responsive teaching and the inclusion of diverse narratives are being challenged, how do you each navigate resistance while continuing to center the identity, equity, and social consciousness in your art education practice? And maybe you've come up against pushback yourselves and want to speak to that. How do you deal?
I'm gonna jump right in for this one, only because one of the images that I shared in the introduction is actually for a friendship bracelet. So we created this like giant friendship bracelet that's made from San Diego Unified students and also Tijuana students. And really for me, and then going back to like what connects us all, if you're addressing like the ideas like of identity, equity, and social consciousness, you have to really just, like I said, you have to think about like what does connect us all, right? And the basic the basic foundation of friendship. That's how I approached it, right? Like, what makes a good friend? How do you make a good friend? And that was like the basic question that we have. It's just like this, like offering that question, right? So, and like all the students came up with like all these different response regarding that. And, you know, the Tijuana students actually, they were a little more political, right? They were talking about like physical borders and these geographical boundaries, when the San Diego students were like a little more like just kind of like, you know, a little more general, I guess. So I think for me, it's just like understanding what is that essential question and what is fundamentally what's going to bring us together. And that's how I approach things. Like I said, I'm looking at this in a district-wide lens. So, and then how can we connect each other in this like fundamental question?
And I think, and thank you, Kat, for I think this question might even probe deeper beyond the connectivity, but how do you deal with pushback, resistance to that? You know, like perhaps in the district, if you have, you know, certain admin, whatever, hey, don't do this. We can't talk about this kind of thing. If you want to speak more to that, or Alex or Bea as well.
I have worked in the very conservative area before, and I approached it the same way. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, because I'm just talking about you know, like I said, like that essential, you know, like what is that essential question? So at least that's how I approached it. So yeah, so I'm gonna you guys speak.
So like I work I'm in Illinois, in Chicago, so you know, a lot of this stuff there isn't really pushback on a lot of things. You know, a lot of stuff is encouraged and accepted, which is pretty great that I have the opportunity to work in that kind of environment. And also in the school, it is very supportive of like social justice issues, you know, knowing your history, fighting back, you know, all of those kinds of things. Um, my thing is to say, you know, as an educator, even if you're not working in Illinois or Chicago or a place like that, in a conservative place, you know, you do have the ability to to show students artwork, and to show students artwork that deals with some of these issues. And you could put that artwork next to other artworks that don't, and have those conversations start happening, and have the differences, and let the students figure it out for themselves, right? They're starting those conversations, they're engaging in these things. They're going to then ultimately, hopefully, want to do that like research, that learning the background, and start figuring out like what do they want to say for themselves, instead of what are they trying to say that they're hearing from their adults or people around them. And I know it's easier said than done, because I don't work in that kind of a place, but that's how I feel like I would approach it. And I still do. Like, you know, there's kids at our school who, you know, don't agree with LGBTQ family, but I still show those artists, and I still talk about, you know, those topics and why those artists are making the kind of work that they're doing. And the kids just have to sort of, you know, deal with the reality of what that is.
Yeah, I agree very much. I think it's the pushbacks that I've ever had, I believe, are some students. I'm talking in college, for example. I don't want to be precise because they were very particular, but I think that, you know, our job, or my answer to these questions, is also that we are inviting different voices. I think that's quite important, because it's not our voice that matters. It's the tray to bring their different voices. It's that opportunity to see the different stuff that can be shown through the discussion, through the process, through the, you know, creation and mistakes and all that. But by looking at those drawings, there is an invitation for questioning things, or reassuring things, or, you know, dealing with things that you are or have in that moment. And I think that's an important job. Just that, just looking at the class, on the tables, and what is people doing.
I want to keep going, but it's 6 o'clock. So I feel like we could, there's so much to say, and now we're getting into the nitty gritty. Laura, I don't know if you want to step in to wrap it up, or
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you so much,
guys.
everybody, for taking part in this. Yvette, Beatriz, Kat, Alex, it was such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for submitting your applications to be a part of this panel. Yeah, this was just so powerful and so thoughtful. We appreciate you so much. And on behalf of CAEA and LACMA, I just want to say thank you and good night to everybody.